All right, guys, we're here with Stephen Igoe from Hoist the Colors, covers East Carolina in the 24/7 Sports Network. Here to talk about new Miami transfer Brandon Johnson, kind of a versatile forward. Stephen, just your impressions of Brandon and from his 3 years there at ECU.
Yeah, I mean, where to begin? Brandon is, I would say, one of the best stories we've had the recent pleasure of covering, just because he was really such an unheralded guy coming out of junior college and wasn't really recruited at all out of high school. It's not like he was a bad student or anything. He was just kind of undervalued. And former head coach Joe Dooley did an incredible job of evaluating him coming out of Brunswick Community College, and he just steadily improved throughout his career at ECU. At first he was kind of that typical, like, garbage bucket rebounder type guy who just kind of played near the basket under the rim. And that was kind of his game. And then when Mike Schwartz came in from Tennessee a couple of years ago, he basically told Brandon, all right, in order to continue to excel as a player, become a starting player in this league, you're going to have to develop a 3-point shot. So he just developed, was always good at rebounding, and then just steadily increased his range, his consistency. And that's the biggest thing about him is he's not really like a back to the basket type forward. He's more of a stretch four who is a really good rebounder. He's not really like a banger inside, but he just has a knack for being in the right position to get reboundings, out leaping other guys, and really good shooter, great range. I mean, he made some shots from like near half court at times, just in the middle of an offensive set in the half court. So really good shooter, stretch four, great rebounder, and he's definitely an interesting player for Miami.
Yeah, and I'm definitely curious to hear more about his development. I definitely want to get into that. For people that heard Mike Schwartz's name, for Miami fans, he's a former assistant coach back before Larinaga. He was under the Haith staff, in case people are wondering, hearing that name there. Look, I want to talk about this season with Brandon. 14 points a game, 8.5 rebounds. What'd you make of it? You had that tough stretch there, looked like middle of the season, but then 17-9 over the last 10 games. Just what'd you make of his season this past year?
Yeah, I thought he kind of had to adapt, I would say, like the middle of his, second year with ECU to be in kind of the focal point, and teams are really keying on him. And I felt like this year he did a much better job of being consistent day in and day out. I mean, he did have a little bit of a lull, but the entire team did. And he got banged up one game with a hip pointer. He actually, not a lot of people knew this. He dealt with kind of a sickness early in the season. He missed a couple of games where ECU lost because he was such an integral part of the team very early. And it took him a while to really get back into that rhythm. But I thought, all things considered, once he kind of got back to 100%, he was the team's most consistent player as far as efficient scoring, efficient rebounding on a night in, night out basis. And that was something that I thought, him entering the portal, he can go somewhere else where maybe he's not like the number one or number two scouted guy necessarily. I think will really benefit him, depending on what happens at Miami. But definitely, I thought he took a big leap this year in terms of consistency, and not handling the adversity the best his sophomore year, but his junior year really seemed to mature in that manner, and in terms of becoming more of the man, on a night in, night out basis.
Yeah, let's stay with that. How will he fit in at Miami and in the ACC? Certainly, you're familiar there, being in that area with Brandon. And I think Miami. I think we're still trying to figure out exactly how he'll fit in terms of what the roster will look like. They're still waiting on three guys, kind of the three of their top guys, to waiting on word to see exactly how the roster will shake out with them, and then Brandon kind of fitting in off of that. But just maybe his abilities. You're touching on some of the things in terms of his scouting report and his role. How do you kind of envision it? And essentially, too, another year of development, as you've mentioned, as he kind of goes into this fifth year of college for him.
Yeah, I mean, I think the most interesting thing watching him on a nightly basis is how is he going to handle maybe the athleticism of the ACC, because at times when and he is a legit 6'8", like, so the biggest thing about his game is he can really shoot over anybody. Most teams would try to put kind of an athletic 6'7", 6'6" guy on him, and he would be able to shoot over the top of him. The one thing I question maybe going to the ACC is how is he going to handle if he's playing like a true four position, more of a guy who can bang in the paint a little bit. I think he's got to grow with a little bit of physicality defensively, and then offensively. He's kind of, I don't want to say limited, but he's not much of a back to the basket player. The one thing he did do better this year was instead of just being a guy who shoots threes, he would utilize the pump fake a lot more. He's not super explosive like first step as far as getting downhill, but he's such a good shooter that teams have to close out on him so hard. So he would pump fake, make the guy miss, drive in, and get fouled. He started to get to the line more, and he's not. That's not going to be like the best part of his game, but he's a pretty good foul shooter. He can get to the line, and I would say that's the biggest question going to the ACC is, hey, if he's guarded by a guy who is more his height, who can really stick with him on the perimeter, how is he going to score more consistently, and how is he going to do defensively if he's playing like a true four? And he played some three in some bigger lineups for ECU, but if he has to guard like a really athletic wing that's quick, I think that could be an issue. So it'll be an interesting fit for Miami. Like, how do they, envision him in that role? Is he going to play four? Is he going to try to play some three? I think he's a better four, like a stretch four, but he did dabble with some three and played some five in smaller lineups at ECU.
I definitely want to get into that because I think that is a big question mark. A lot of fans want to know, and kind of watching him that 3-4, and it's an interesting situation for Miami, kind of transitioning off the small ball a little bit. They bring in Lynn Kidd there to play kind of that natural center spot. They get some size, front court help is certainly one of the things they wanted to target here in the transfer portal, and getting Brandon in there. With him and just looking at numbers, not just the counting numbers, but some of the efficiency with his rebounding ability. And Stephen, you touched on it, him being a good rebounder. We saw that even his high school numbers, kind of just looking at that. He is just a guy that's been able to rebound, defensive rebound, always key. Maybe can you touch on that? What stands out to you, his ability to rebound, and maybe kind of that part of his game?
I think a lot of it is, I mean, I think everything that makes a great rebounder is effort based and basketball IQ too. You have to understand angles. You guys know the deal. If you're a smart basketball player, usually and you're big and you have a want to, you're a good rebounder. And Brandon is all those things. And I think it's just been something he's naturally been able to do. A lot of bigs or a lot of guys his size struggle just grabbing the basketball. Like, it sounds simple, but like, he's got really good hands. That's one thing. He usually, if he gets his hands on a ball, it doesn't slip out. They had another guy, Ezra Asar, hit the portal, who's extremely athletic, talented, but he always dropped the basketball, and he wasn't a good rebounder. He's more athletic than Brandon, but he's not as good of a rebounder because Brandon just knows how to position himself. He's good at boxing out. He's got long arms, good wingspan. So that's just always been part of his game. He crashes the glass. This was under Coach Schwartz, they were a very heavy offensive rebounding team, and he would get a lot of second chance buckets that way as well. So he understands the importance of crashing the glass offensively, defensively, and I think that's the definite strength of his game because it's always been there. But him being able to expand his range really makes him more of a complete player, a threat on all sides of the court.
You touched on it earlier, just his development, kind of working, kind of being a worker into this. Can you expand a little bit on his personality, a little bit what you know of it, kind of what to expect as he kind of integrates himself into this program, into this team, just this type of person he is, what you know?
Yeah, Brandon is he was one of my favorite guys to cover because like his freshman year at ECU, I guess his COVID freshman year, however you want to term it, he just he was not comfortable talking to the media at all. And not that he was a huge talker this past year, but like I talked with him about he discussed more the process of becoming like a professional type player, obviously still playing in college, but taking that approach of being more of the leader, more of the face of the program. And he really developed as a talker, a guy who was more comfortable in front of the media, still overall quiet. You guys might have to work on him to get him to open up a bit. But once you get to know him, great kid, probably outside of RJ Felton, who's ECU's returning leading scorer for this coming season, I would say the hardest worker, and I would say definitely the most consistent worker on the team. The coaching staff always talked about how he was like the first guy in the gym. 7:30 a.m. He would park his car in the same spots in the parking lot. You knew he was there because his car was there. He was getting a certain amount of shots up. So I just think Coach Schwartz and his staff did a great job of instilling in him, hey, if you're going to be this guy who reaches his ceiling, you have got to put the work in. And he bought into it. So I say for sure he should have very little problem acclimating to Miami with his work ethic, his IQ. I think he'll be a guy that his teammates like, and definitely the fans and coaches like a lot.
And I assume this work ethic that you're talking about, getting there early, that's what's kind of led him in this development of his 3-point shot. And just looking at the numbers, the percentages, of his 3-point shot, not just the count, what he shot from three, but the percent of shots from three compared to two, it kind of was only 13% of his shots were from three, then goes up to 49 and 52. So clearly it's a big part of his game. And you touched on it too earlier that he's a good shooter from three. Right there, I think 36%, 36, 37 last year. What do you make of his 3-point shot? Because again, if he could be that stretch four, or if he is going to play some three, being able to knock down 3-pointers will certainly be big for him.
Yeah, I mean, I would be surprised if that number at minimum stays in the mid 30s at Miami. I would, a lot of it obviously depends on the pieces around him, but I mean, he was more times than not getting, probably one of the more athletic wings or four men on the other team, and not that those guys won't guard him in the ACC, but like I don't know if he'll be the number one, option on a night in, night out basis from the other teams as far as, hey, we got to take this guy away. Like that was every night going into play ECU, you knew you had to take away RJ Felton and Brandon Johnson. So those two guys were crossed every game. And they were physical with him. Teams were physical with him. He had to, deal with that on the perimeter a little bit. But the one consistent thing he always did was he always seemed to make some big 3-pointers. And I feel like having to deal with maybe some physicality on the perimeter and just being more of a focal point this past year and still getting his shot off because he's so long will help him transition to the ACC. And kind of like I said earlier too, the range, like, I mean, if he's open more times than not, like simply just an open three, he's knocking it down. But, the other thing that he developed this past year was he made a ton of contested threes and he could pull up at any point. He's more of a guy who would catch it and shoot it rather than, shoot it off the dribble, but he is capable of doing that as well. But he definitely gives Miami a weapon from the perimeter. I mean, there aren't too many 6'8" guys in the country who can knock down, 35, 36, 37% three, but he can definitely do it.
That's great stuff, Stephen. I appreciate you taking the time. Great knowledge, great insight on Brandon Johnson, Miami's newest Hurricane here.
Absolutely. You guys enjoy BJ. Great kid, great basketball player. So I'll definitely be pulling for him.